I'm Eleanor, I'm 42 years old, and I am a woman who has spent the better part of her life learning to swallow her words. I've learned to smile when I wanted to cry, to nod when I wanted to argue, and to accept when I wanted to refuse. It was a survival mechanism, a way to navigate the treacherous, quietly hostile waters of my own family. But tonight, that mechanism failed. Tonight, at what was supposed to be a celebration of my parents' 50 years of marriage, I watched them take a piece of my daughter's heart and crush it with a casual, almost bored, indifference. And in that moment, I knew I was done swallowing my words. I was about to serve them a truth they had been avoiding for decades, and it was going to be the most memorable anniversary gift they ever received. The story of tonight really begins 40 years ago, in the subtle, unspoken hierarchy of our small family. There was my father, Richard, a man whose approval was a currency he doled out sparingly and mostly in one direction. There was my mother, Margaret, a woman who saw her children not as individuals, but as reflections of herself, one polished and perfect, the other less so. And then there were her two daughters, Claire, my younger sister, the polished one, and me. Claire was born with a sparkle that my parents seemed to find endlessly captivating. She was the sun around which our family's little solar system revolved. Her first steps were a miracle, her first words a sonnet. My achievements, while not insignificant, were always met with a lukewarm, "Oh, that's nice, dear." Claire's were cause for celebration. This wasn't something I imagined. It was a tangible, measurable force in our home, as real as the floorboards beneath my feet. I remember one particularly stark example when I was 10. I had worked for weeks on a diorama for the school's history fair. It was a detailed, painstakingly constructed model of a Roman villa, complete with tiny clay amphorae and hand-painted mosaics on the floor. I won first place. I came home clutching a blue ribbon, my chest puffed with a pride so pure it felt like it could lift me off the ground. I presented it to my mother, who was on the phone with one of her friends. She glanced at the ribbon, gave my head a distracted pat, and said, "That's nice, Eleanor. Now go wash up for dinner, you've got clay under your fingernails." 2 weeks later, Claire, who was 8, brought home a finger painting from art class, a chaotic swirl of green and brown she'd titled Frog in a Pond. My father took one look at it and declared it a work of abstract genius. He went out the next day and bought a gaudy, expensive-looking frame. He hung it in the hallway, right next to the family portraits. "A future artist, our Claire," he would say to any guest who came to the house, gesturing to the smudge of paint as if it were a Picasso. My blue ribbon was never mentioned again. It sat on my dresser until it was lost during a spring cleaning, a forgotten testament to a forgotten achievement. This pattern of disparity wasn't just about ribbons and paintings. It bled into every aspect of our lives, defining our worth in my parents' eyes. When it came time for college, I earned a partial scholarship to a respectable state university. I worked part-time jobs to cover the rest, graduating with honors and a mountain of student loans. My parents' contribution was a card with a $100 bill inside and the advice to be frugal. When Claire decided she wanted to attend a private liberal arts college on the other side of the country, a school with a tuition that made my eyes water, my parents didn't hesitate. They cashed in bonds they had told me didn't exist. "It's an investment in her future," my father explained, as if my future had been a bargain bin purchase. Claire's letters home were read aloud like scripture. My weekly calls were often cut short because my mother had to catch her favorite television show. The dynamic solidified as we became adults. I built a stable, quiet life for myself. I became a technical writer, a job that suited my preference for clarity and order. I married a good man who sadly passed away far too young, leaving me with our greatest collaboration, our daughter, Lily. Lily became my world, a bright, sensitive, and fiercely intelligent girl who had inherited her father's kindness and my quiet determination. Claire, meanwhile, married a wealthy man and had a son, Leo. She lived a life that was chronicled in glossy Christmas cards and boastful phone calls from my mother. Claire and Leo were a constant topic of conversation. Leo's soccer goals were recounted with the breathless excitement of a World Cup final. Claire's charity luncheons were described in such lavish detail you'd think she was solving world hunger. My life, and more importantly, Lily's life, was treated as a footnote. When Lily won the regional spelling bee in middle school, I called my mother, bubbling with pride. Oh, how lovely, she'd said, before immediately pivoting. Speaking of achievements, you'll never guess what Leo did. He made the travel team. They're going to a tournament in Florida next month. Richard and I are flying down to watch, of course. We can't miss it. There was no thought to the fact that they'd never once attended any of Lily's school plays or piano recitals, all of which were a mere 20-minute drive from their house. Florida was a worthy destination for Leo's soccer game, but my neighborhood was apparently a bridge too far for Lily's turn as the lead in the school play. It was this history, this 4-decade-long narrative of being less than, that I carried with me as we prepared for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be a grand affair, a celebration of their enduring love. But for me, it felt like a celebration of a family structure that had always left me on the outside looking in. I had made my peace with it, for the most part. I had built my own world with Lily, a world where she was the sun. But I was naive. I thought the battle was over, that my role as the lesser daughter was a settled fact. I never imagined they would draft my child into the same tired, old war. And I never imagined that my quiet, sweet 14-year-old daughter, with nothing but love in her heart, would be the one to become the final casualty. That was my mistake. And it was a mistake that was about to be rectified in front of 80 of their closest friends and family. The idea for the speech began with Lily. About a month before the party, she came to me with a notebook in her hand and a serious expression on her face. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, and she chewed on the end of her pen, a habit she had when she was deeply focused on a project. "Mom," she said, "I want to do something special for Grandma and Grandpa's anniversary." My heart gave a little squeeze of both pride and apprehension. "That's so sweet, honey. What are you thinking?" "I want to give a speech," she announced, her eyes shining with earnestness. "A real one, about them and their love and what they mean to me. I think 50 years is a really big deal. It's like history." A part of me, the jaded, 42-year-old part, wanted to gently steer her away from the idea. I wanted to protect her from the potential for disappointment, from the vacant stares and polite, dismissive smiles I knew so well. I knew my parents. They would see this gesture not through the lens of a granddaughter's love, but through the warped filter of their own biases. They would find it quaint, perhaps a little tiresome, and it would not hold a candle to whatever expensive, store-bought gift Claire would inevitably present. But then I looked at my daughter. I saw the pure, unblemished love in her eyes. She hadn't been conditioned by years of subtle slights and overt favoritism. To her, they were simply her grandparents. She loved them and she wanted to show it. How could I deny her that? How could I taint her genuine affection with my own cynicism? It would be like telling a child that Santa Claus isn't real. You might be telling the truth, but you're stealing a little bit of magic in the process. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Lily," I said, forcing a warmth into my voice that I didn't entirely feel. "I'm sure they would love that." And so, the project began. For the next 3 weeks, Lily's speech became the focal point of her evenings. She filled pages of her notebook with memories, with questions for me about their past, with quotes about love she found online. She interviewed me about my own childhood, asking what Grandma and Grandpa were like when they were younger. I gave her the sanitized, Hallmark card version, carefully editing out the painful anecdotes of my own youth. I told her about the way my father used to lift me onto his shoulders to see over crowds, leaving out the part where he stopped doing it once Claire was old enough to demand the same perch. I told her about the way my mother taught me to bake, leaving out the part where my cakes were always too dense, while Claire's were perfectly light. I watched as Lily crafted these half-truths and her own sweet memories into a beautiful narrative. Her speech wasn't just a simple congratulations. It was a heartfelt, surprisingly insightful tribute. She wrote about their marriage as a tree, with roots that had grown deep over 50 years, weathering storms and providing shade for the whole family. It was a beautiful metaphor, and it was all hers. The week before the party, the rehearsals started. Every night after dinner, she would stand in the middle of the living room, her handwritten note cards clutched in her hands, and she would recite the speech. Good evening, everyone, she'd begin, her voice a little shaky at first. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lily, and I am the very proud granddaughter of Richard and Margaret. She practiced I.T. over and over, refining the rhythm, memorizing the lines until the note cards were more of a comfort blanket than a necessity. She would ask for my feedback, her eyes wide with sincerity. Was that part too cheesy, Mom? Should I pause here for effect? It's perfect, honey, I would tell her, and I meant it. It was perfect because it was a pure expression of her heart. To see her so dedicated, so full of love for the very people who had so often made me feel unloved, was a complex and painful thing. I was immensely proud of her character, her capacity for love. But with every rehearsal, my sense of dread grew, coiling itself into a tight knot in my stomach. I was helping her polish a beautiful, fragile seashell, knowing she was about to hand it to someone who would likely hold it for a second before carelessly tossing it aside. The day of the party arrived, a bright, sunny Saturday. The air was thick with a sense of forced festivity. Lily was a bundle of nervous energy. She laid out her dress, a simple, elegant navy blue dress we had picked out together the night before. She must have tried it on a dozen times. "How do I look?" she asked, smoothing down the skirt for the 10th time as we were about to leave. "You look beautiful," I told her, my voice catching slightly. "You look like you." The car ride to the reception hall was mostly silent. Lily was quietly mouthing the words to her speech, her hands folded in her lap. I was driving, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my mind replaying 1,000 small cuts from a lifetime of family gatherings. I remembered my high school graduation party, where my parents spent most of the time talking to my aunt and uncle about Claire's upcoming summer camp. I remembered the Christmases, where Leo's pile of presents from them dwarfed Lily's. It was always the same story, just a different chapter. As I pulled into the valet line at the lavishly decorated country club, I took a deep breath. "Ready?" I asked Lily. She looked at me, her eyes a mixture of excitement and terror. She clutched the small purse that held her note cards. "Ready," she whispered. I gave her a reassuring smile, a practiced mask of maternal calm. But inside, the knot in my stomach tightened. I felt like I was leading my own child into an ambush, one that I had helped her prepare for. As we walked through the grand entrance, into a ballroom filled with the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter, I just prayed that, for once, I was wrong. I prayed that today they would see my daughter. That they would really, truly see her. The ballroom was a sea of pastel colors, shimmering gold decorations, and the soft melody of a string quartet playing in the corner. Tables adorned with towering floral centerpieces filled the space, and waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was the kind of opulent affair my mother lived for, a perfect stage to display her perfect life and her perfect family. My parents stood near the entrance, a receiving line of two. My father, Richard, looked distinguished in his tailored suit, a polite but distant smile fixed on his face. My mother, Margaret, was radiant in a shimmering silver gown, her expression one of triumphant satisfaction. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Eleanor, Lily, you're here," she trilled as we approached, offering us both an air kiss that didn't quite make contact with either of our cheeks. "Happy anniversary, Mom, Dad," I said, handing them a wrapped gift. A custom-made photo album filled with pictures from their 50 years together, a project I had spent weeks compiling. "Oh, thank you, dear," my mother said, passing the gift to an assistant without a second glance. "Put this with the others." My father nodded at me. "Eleanor, you look well." He then looked down at Lily, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something, perhaps genuine affection. "And you, Lily, you've gotten so tall." "Happy anniversary, Grandpa, Grandma," Lily said, her voice filled with a reverence that pained me. "You both look amazing." "Thank you, sweetheart," my mother said, her eyes already scanning the room over Lily's head. "Oh, there's Claire, we were just wondering where she was." And just like that, we were dismissed. My sister, Claire, glided towards us, a vision in emerald green. Her husband and son, Leo, followed in her wake. Claire had a way of entering a room that demanded attention, and my parents were her most captive audience. "Mummy, Daddy," she exclaimed, embracing them both with theatrical warmth. "You look absolutely incredible. 50 years, I can't believe it." The shift in my parents' demeanor was instantaneous and profound. My father's polite smile transformed into a wide, genuine grin. My mother's eyes lit up, her entire focus narrowing in on her favored child. "Claire, darling, and Leo, my handsome boy, come give your grandma a hug," Margaret gushed, pulling my nephew into a tight embrace. Leo, a 13-year-old boy who carried himself with the unearned confidence of a king, accepted the affection as his due. They presented their gift, a small, elegantly wrapped box from a high-end jewelry store. My mother opened it to reveal a pair of diamond earrings. She gasped, a hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Claire, you shouldn't have, they're exquisite." "Only the best for my parents," Claire said with a dazzling smile. Leo then stepped forward. "I have a gift too," he said, and my mother leaned in as if she were about to receive a royal decree. He had made them a slideshow of photos set to music, which he had loaded onto a digital picture frame. "Oh, Leo, how thoughtful, and so clever with all this technology," my father boomed, clapping him on the shoulder. "We'll set it up on the main table for everyone to see." Lily stood beside me, watching the scene unfold. She held her little purse with her note cards inside, her earlier excitement visibly dimming. She was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the invisible hierarchy I had lived with my entire life. She was a supporting character in a play that was all about Claire and her son. I put a gentle hand on her back. "Let's go find our table, honey," I whispered. We found our assigned seats at a table near the back of the ballroom, sharing it with some of my parents' old neighbors and a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years. Claire's family, naturally, was seated at the head table with my parents. Throughout the dinner, the pattern continued. My father stood up to give a welcome speech and spent a solid 5 minutes extolling Claire's virtues and thanking her for her unwavering support and love. He mentioned my name once, in passing, as part of a collective thank you to our children. My mother made her rounds to every table, and when she got to ours, she spent the entire time talking about Leo's upcoming soccer tournament in Florida. "Richard and I are just so proud," she said to the table at large. "He's a true athlete, takes after his father, of course." She gave Lily a brief, distracted smile. "I hope your schoolwork is going well, dear." Lily just nodded, her eyes downcast, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate. She hadn't eaten much. The vibrant, confident girl who had practiced her speech in our living room was shrinking before my very eyes. I tried to engage her to pull her back. "Are you still excited to give your speech?" I asked quietly, my heart aching for her. She looked up at me, her expression fragile. "I don't know, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Everyone else's gifts are so big, the earrings, the digital frame. Mine is just words." "Honey, your gift is the most personal one of all," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a conviction I was rapidly losing. "It comes from your heart. That's what matters." But as I looked towards the head table, where my parents were laughing at something Leo had said, their faces alight with adoration, I knew I was lying. To them, the heart didn't matter as much as the spectacle. It never had. The room felt cold, the laughter sounded hollow, and the beautiful floral centerpieces suddenly looked like funeral arrangements. We were here to celebrate a 50-year union, but all I could feel was the profound, 50-year-old chasm that ran right through the center of our family. And I could see my daughter, my sweet, innocent Lily, slipping right into it. After the dessert plates were cleared, the master of ceremonies, a cheerful man my parents had hired, stepped up to the microphone. The soft music faded, and a hush fell over the ballroom. "Good evening, everyone," he said with practiced enthusiasm. "And once again, a very happy 50th anniversary to our wonderful couple, Richard and Margaret. They say the secret to a long marriage is a good sense of humor and a great deal of patience. Well, after 50 years, these two must be comedians and saints." A wave of polite laughter rippled through the room. My parents, seated at the head table, beamed. And now, the MC continued, it's time for a few special people to share some words. To kick things off, we have a tribute from one of the people who knows them best. Please welcome their beloved grandson, Leo. My blood ran cold. Leo, I shot a glance at Lily. Her face, which had been filled with a nervous, hopeful tension, crumpled. Her eyes widened in disbelief and a deep, gut-wrenching hurt. She had been so sure she would be first, or at least be asked. We had spoken to the MC earlier, and I had specifically told him my daughter had prepared a few words. He had smiled and said, "Of course, we'll fit her right in." Apparently, fitting her in meant being bumped for the favorite. Claire was preening, giving Leo's shoulder a proud squeeze as he stood up. My parents were clapping enthusiastically, their faces glowing with pride. Leo, looking confident and unbothered, strode to the stage. He didn't V-note cards. He had an easy, charming smile that he had clearly inherited from his mother. He gave a speech that was perfectly adequate. He told a funny, generic story about going fishing with his grandpa and complimented his grandma's cooking. He ended by saying, "You guys are the best grandparents ever. Congratulations on 50 years, I love you." The room erupted in applause. People dabbed at their eyes. My mother looked as though she might burst with pride. "Oh, isn't he just precious?" she mouthed to Claire, who nodded smugly. As Leo walked back to his seat, a hero returned from victory, the MC took the mic again. "Thank you, Leo, wonderful job. I think everyone can agree that was just beautiful." He then scanned his notes. My heart started to pound. This is it, I thought, he'll call her up now. But he didn't. He called up my father's old business partner, who told a long, rambling story about a golf trip from 1987. Then he called up my mother's best friend, who spoke about their shared love of gardening. I leaned over to Lily, who was sitting perfectly still, her hands clenched in her lap. "Are you okay, sweetie?" She didn't look at me, she just stared at the empty plate in front of her. "I'm fine," she whispered, but a single hot tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, landing silently on the white tablecloth. She quickly wiped it away, as if ashamed. That tear was a lit match on the dry tinder of my 42 years of resentment. Seeing her pain, so raw and so undeserved, ignited a fury in me that was white-hot and absolute. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about forgotten birthdays or unframed ribbons. This was about my child. My child, who had spent weeks pouring her heart into a tribute for two people who couldn't even be bothered to give her 5 minutes of their time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the MC said, "And now, I believe the couple's daughter, Eleanor, and their granddaughter, Lily, wanted to say something." He said it as a question, an afterthought, as if he'd just remembered. Lily visibly flinched. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. The spark she'd had was gone, replaced by a hollow look of humiliation. The thought of going up there now, after being so thoroughly forgotten and then tacked on at the end like an errand, was clearly agonizing for her. She started to shake her head, a silent no. Before she could refuse, my mother's voice cut across the small distance between our tables. She hadn't stood up, she just leaned over to my father and said, just loud enough for us to hear, "Oh, for heaven's sake, we're running behind schedule." Then she looked in our direction, not at me but at Lily. A strained, impatient smile touched her lips. "Oh, Lily, honey, don't embarrass yourself," she said. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but the words were acid. "It's been a long night, perhaps another time." My father, her ever-loyal second-in-command, nodded in agreement. "Margaret's right, the band is about to start." And then, to seal the humiliation, my mother turned to the MC and waved her hand dismissively. "That's all right," she called out. "We'll move on to the cake cutting." And that was it, the final, brutal dismissal. They hadn't just forgotten Lily, they had actively, publicly, and cruelly silenced her. They had told her in front of everyone that her voice, her love, her effort was an inconvenience, an embarrassment. The MC, caught off guard but eager to please his clients, just stammered, "Oh, okay then. Let's get ready to cut that beautiful cake." The music swelled. The waiters began to wheel out a multi-tiered cake. The guests started to murmur and clap. The moment was over. The window had closed. Lily just stared, her face ashen. She slowly opened her little purse and took out her note cards. She looked at them for a long moment, at the neatly written words that had held so much meaning just an hour ago. Then, with a quiet finality, she tore them in half and then in half again, and let the small white squares fall from her fingers onto her lap. She didn't cry anymore. She just looked empty. I reached out and put my hand over hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. I looked at the head table. My parents were smiling, laughing, preparing to cut their cake. Claire was adjusting her hair, completely unconcerned. They had moved on. They had crushed this small, beautiful thing and hadn't even noticed the sound it made. But I had noticed. And in the ringing silence of my daughter's cancelled speech, I found my own voice. It wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be a shout. It was going to be quiet and clear, and it was going to cut deeper than any knife. My turn to speak hadn't been on the program, but it was coming. I didn't react immediately. An explosion would have been satisfying, but it would have also been predictable. It would have allowed them to dismiss me as hysterical or overly emotional, labels they had been all too happy to apply to me over the years whenever I dared to voice dissent. No, a scene was what they would expect. Silence was a weapon they wouldn't know how to defend against. So I put my arm around Lily's shoulders and pulled her close. She leaned into me, her small body trembling slightly. I just held her, my eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding at the front of the room. I watched my parents join hands to hold the ceremonial knife. I watched them smile for the cameras as they cut the first slice of their towering, five-tiered cake. The crowd applauded. The band began to play a cheerful, upbeat song. The party, for everyone else, was a resounding success. For the next half hour, I was a silent observer. I watched my mother feed my father a bite of cake, a playful, performative gesture of affection for the crowd. I watched Claire laugh, throwing her head back as her husband whispered something in her ear. I watched Leo, who was now on his phone, no doubt texting his friends, the glory of his speech already a distant memory. They were all enclosed in a bubble of blissful self-satisfaction, completely oblivious to the devastation they had wrought at my table. Each cheerful note from the band, each burst of laughter from the head table, was like a stone being added to a scale inside me. With every passing minute, my resolve hardened. This was no longer a spontaneous surge of anger. It was crystallizing into a calm, cold, and unshakable purpose. "Mom," Lily's voice was small, muffled against my shoulder. "I'm here, baby," I whispered back, stroking her hair. "Can we go home?" The question hung in the air, a perfectly reasonable request. I could have said yes. We could have slipped out the back, our absence noted by no one of importance. We could have gone home, and I could have spent the night comforting her, telling her that her grandparents were just old and thoughtless, that it didn't mean anything. But I knew that would be another lie. It meant everything. And if we left now, the lesson they had taught her tonight would be the one that stuck. That when you are hurt by people who are supposed to love you, you retreat. You disappear. You accept the pain in silence. I couldn't let that be the lesson. I had learned it, and it had cost me pieces of myself over the years. I would not let it cost her the same. "Soon, honey," I said, my voice steady and low. "Just wait. I need you to wait with me for a little while longer. Can you do that?" She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and confused. She saw something in my face, I think, a determination she wasn't used to seeing. A quiet fire. She nodded slowly. "Okay, Mom." While the party swirled around us, I began to prepare. In my mind, I was no longer a technical writer or a grieving widow or a forgotten daughter. I was an architect, building a structure of words. My speech wouldn't be emotional, not on the surface. It would be factual. It would be precise. It would be constructed from the hard, undeniable bricks of memory. Technical writers are trained to convey complex information with clarity and logic, to strip away the fluff and present the core facts. That was exactly what I was going to do. I thought back to the blue ribbon, not with the sting of a 10-year-old, but with the dispassionate analysis of an adult. Fact: one child's major achievement was ignored. Another's minor one was framed and celebrated. I thought back to the college tuition. Fact: one child was told to be frugal and take out loans. The other was funded by bonds that had previously been declared non-existent. I thought back to my wedding, a small, modest affair in a local church that my parents had called sensible. Then, I remembered Claire's wedding, a destination event in Hawaii that they had gushed about for years, calling it unforgettable. And I thought about our children. Fact: my parents would fly thousands of miles to watch Leo play a soccer game. They would not drive 20 minutes to watch Lily in a starring role. Fact: at Christmas, Leo received extravagant, expensive gifts. Lily received gift cards and sweaters that were the wrong size. And the final, most damning fact: tonight, my parents had told my daughter, who had prepared a tribute of pure love, not to embarrass herself, and then handed the microphone to the son of their favorite child. These weren't feelings. They were data points. And when laid out in order, they painted a picture that was irrefutable. It was a picture of a family built on a foundation of gross inequality. The MC returned to the stage one last time. All right, everyone, the bar is open, and the band is going to play us into the night. But before we let them loose, let's have one more huge round of applause for our happy couple, Richard and Margaret. As the applause began to die down, I stood up. My movement was calm and deliberate. I pushed my chair back quietly, placed my napkin on the table, and started walking tea. Towards the stage, I didn't rush. My heels made a soft, rhythmic clicking on the polished dance floor. Heads began to turn. The band, about to launch into a cover of a popular dance song, paused. The chatter in the room quieted. All eyes were on me. I saw my mother's face, her smile faltering, replaced by a look of confusion and annoyance. I saw my father frown, a silent question in his eyes. I saw Claire whisper something to her husband, a look of irritation on her face. I walked past the MC, who looked utterly bewildered, and I took the microphone from its stand. I held it in my hand. It felt cool and solid. I looked out at the sea of faces, all staring at me, waiting. And then my eyes found my parents. I looked directly at them. The calm inside me was absolute. The storm was about to break. The silence in the ballroom was total. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that precedes either a punchline or a verdict. I gripped the microphone, my knuckles white, but my hand was steady. I looked directly at my parents at the head table. Their expressions had shifted from confusion to guarded irritation. My mother had a tight, plastic smile pinned to her lips, a clear signal that I was disrupting her perfectly curated evening. My father's brow was furrowed in disapproval. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and even amplified by the speakers throughout the hall. It didn't waver. "My name is Aliner. For those of you who don't know, I am Margaret and Richard's eldest daughter." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I saw a few people in the audience exchange quizzical looks. The program for tonight's festivities had a few speakers listed. I continued, my gaze never leaving my parents. Friends, colleagues, a beloved grandchild. But I was told we were running behind schedule, so I was asked to keep my remarks brief. "Don't worry, I will." My mother's smile tightened even further. Claire was now staring at me with open hostility. "I'm not here to give a toast," I said, and a murmur went through the crowd. A toast is for celebrating a perfect picture. And tonight, I've realized that I'm tired of pretending to be in a picture that I've never really been a part of. Instead, I want to talk about memory. 50 years is a long time. It's a tapestry woven from thousands of memories. But the thing about a tapestry is, if you only look at one side, you miss the whole story. You see the beautiful picture, but you don't see the knots, the cut threads, and the messy underside that holds it all together. Tonight, I want to talk about the knots. I took a breath. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained a calm, measured instrument. "I have a memory," I said, looking at my father. "I'm 10 years old and I've just won first place in the citywide history fair. I bring home a big blue ribbon. I am bursting with pride. My father is on the phone. He glances at it and says, 'That's nice,' before telling me to wash the clay from under my nails. A few weeks later, my sister Claire brings home a finger painting. My father declares it a work of genius, has it professionally framed, and hangs it in the main hallway. For years, he points to that painting and tells guests about his little artist. I saw my father flinch, a flicker of something, shame, maybe, or just the discomfort of being exposed in his eyes. I turned my gaze to my mother. I have another memory. I'm 18. I've earned a scholarship to a good college, but it doesn't cover everything. I ask for help. My mother tells me, we have to be frugal, Eleanor. Money doesn't grow on trees. I worked 2 jobs to get through school. 2 years later, Claire decides she wants to attend a private college that costs 3 times as much. My parents suddenly discover a forest of money trees. They cash in bonds they'd told me were untouchable. It wasn't a cost. It was an investment in her future. My mother's face had lost its smile. It was pale, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Claire looked horrified, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Memories are funny things, aren't they? I continued, my voice softening slightly, drawing the audience in. They pile up. They create a pattern. A pattern of a family that runs on 2 sets of rules, one set for the golden child and one for the other one. A pattern of lavish praise for one and polite, dismissive pats on the head for the other. A pattern of grand gestures for one and quiet expectations for the other. I let the silence sit for a moment before delivering the final part. My voice was no longer analytical. It was filled with the quiet, profound pain that had been simmering for a lifetime. This pattern, this tapestry of favoritism, is a legacy. And the most heartbreaking thing I've learned tonight is that it's a legacy you have decided to pass down to your grandchildren. I looked over at my table at Lily, who was watching me with wide, tear-filled eyes. There was awe in her expression. She was seeing her quiet, accommodating mother transform into a warrior. My daughter, Lily, I said, my voice thick with emotion for the first time. My funny, brilliant, and deeply loving daughter spent 3 weeks writing a speech for you. She poured her 14-year-old heart into her words. She saw you not as flawed people, but as the giants of her world. She wanted to stand up here and tell you how much she loved you. I turned my full attention back to my parents. They looked frozen, like statues in a museum of their own making. And when the moment came, what did her grandmother say? Oh, don't embarrass yourself. What did her grandfather do? He nodded. And then you handed the microphone to your other grandchild. You didn't just ignore my daughter, you publicly humiliated her. You taught her in this room full of people the same lesson you have spent 40 years teaching me, that her love isn't worth as much, that her voice doesn't deserve to be heard, that next to her cousin, next to Claire's son, she is an embarrassment. The word hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. I saw my mother recoil as if I had physically struck her. So no, I don't have a toast for you. I can't toast to a 50-year union that was built on the foundation of making one child feel cherished and the other feel tolerated. But I will toast to someone else. I raised my free hand, as if holding a glass. I toast to my daughter, Lily. I toast to her beautiful, resilient heart. I toast to the love she was so ready to give. And I make this promise to her in front of all of you. You will never, ever have to tear up your words again. You will never be made to feel that your voice is an inconvenience. Your voice is a gift. And from now on, we will only give it to people who are worthy of hearing it. I placed the microphone carefully back in its stand. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was deafening. It was the sound of 80 people holding their breath. The sound of a family's carefully constructed facade shattering into a million pieces. I turned my back on the stage, on my speechless parents and my furious sister, and I walked back to my table. The knots were no longer hidden. The messy underside of the tapestry was now on full display. As I walked back to my table, it felt as though I was moving through water. The air was thick with unspoken shock. No one moved, no one spoke. The band stood frozen, instruments at the ready. The waiters paused mid-stride. Every single eye in that ballroom was on me. I saw it all peripherally, the open-mouthed stares of distant cousins, the horrified looks on the faces of my parents' friends, the pale, tight-lipped fury of my sister Claire. But my focus was singular. It was on Lily. When I reached her, she stood up immediately. Her eyes were still wet with tears, but they were no longer tears of humiliation. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a profound, world-altering understanding. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not just as her mother, but as a person, a woman with a history and scars she had never known about. I didn't need to say a word. I simply held out my hand. She took it, her small hand gripping mine with a strength that surprised me. I picked up our purses from the chairs, and together we turned and walked away from the table. Our footsteps were the only sound in the cavernous room. Click, click, click on the polished floor. It was the sound of departure, the sound of an ending. With every step, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift from my shoulders. It was the weight of 42 years of unspoken truths, of swallowed pain, of forced smiles. As we passed the head table, I did not look at them, but I could feel their stares burning into the side of my face. We walked straight towards the grand exit of the ballroom, past the gift table, where my thoughtful photo album lay forgotten, past the wilting floral arrangements, past the half-eaten cake that was supposed to symbolize a half-century of love. We stepped out of the ballroom and into the quiet, cool air of the evening. The sound of the party, the music, the life we were leaving behind, was muffled by the heavy doors swinging shut behind us. We didn't run. We just walked, hand in hand, to the valet stand. The car ride home was as silent as the ride there had been, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, apprehensive silence of before. This was a calm, contemplative quiet. Lily stared out the window at the passing city lights, her reflection a ghostly image in the glass. I drove, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind feeling strangely, unnervingly peaceful. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my family, and I felt no regret. I only felt a deep, cleansing calm. When we pulled into our driveway, we sat in the car for a moment before Lily finally spoke. "You never told me those stories," she said softly, not looking at me, "about the ribbon and college." "I know," I replied, my voice gentle. "I guess I didn't want you to see them that way. I wanted you to have your own relationship with them." "But it wasn't a real relationship, was it?" she asked, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were clear and startlingly adult. "It was all pretend. I was pretending they were the grandparents in a book, and they were pretending I mattered." The bluntness of her words was a punch to the gut, but she wasn't wrong. "I am so sorry, Lily," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I let it get that far. I'm sorry they hurt you. I should have protected you better." "But you did, Mom," she said, and her voice was firm. "Tonight, you did." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." In that moment, everything was worth it. The shocked faces, the broken relationships, the inevitable fallout to come, none of it mattered as much as that one sentence from my daughter. I hadn't just stood up for her, I had shown her how to stand up. I had broken the cycle of silent acceptance that had been passed down to me. The fallout, of course, did come. My phone was bombarded with texts and voicemails. One from Claire, calling me a selfish, cruel, and horrible person for ruining our parents' special night. One from my mother, a rambling, tearful message that was equal parts accusation and self-pity, with no acknowledgement of her own actions. My father remained silent. He was always better at punishing with absence. I didn't listen to most of them. I didn't reply. Their words couldn't touch me anymore. They were echoes from a room I had already left. The relationship with my parents, and by extension my sister, is broken. Perhaps irreparably so. The beautiful tapestry is on the floor, its ugly underside exposed for all to see, and I don't think anyone has the will or the skill to repair it. And strangely, I'm okay with that. My life is quieter now and smaller. It is filled with my work, our cozy home, and my incredible daughter. Lily and I talk more now about real things. I am no longer editing my past to make it more palatable for her. I am giving her the whole story. We are building our own family, a tiny but powerful unit of two, founded on the principles of honesty, respect, and unconditional love. We are weaving our own tapestry, and on our tapestry, no one's voice is an embarrassment. Every thread, every color, every knot matters. and it is beautiful. We've reached the end of Aliner's story. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do is not just to protect their child from the world, but to show them how to demand their worth from it. Have you ever had a moment where you knew you had to break your silence for the sake of someone you loved?